Hello, today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2019. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. In the past few months, we've witnessed a torrent of revelations about the collection and sharing of user information by technology companies. So much information is being shared, and it seems like a new data privacy scandal erupts, almost daily. As an enterprise, you need to be aware of what's happening because it could have a major impact on your business. Fortunately, I'm joined today by two of my LB3 colleagues who know quite a bit about this. Sara Crifasi, an associate at the firm, and Kevin DiLallo, who's a senior partner. Kevin, let's start with you. What should an enterprise make of all this information sharing by, pretty much every supplier in the food chain?
Joe, the funny thing is that most enterprises are probably of two minds on data sharing. On the one hand, consumer information is more easily accessed than ever before, which facilitates targeted advertising and increased consumer engagement. That's a good thing, right? On the other hand, enterprises' own data is also at risk. Just as all businesses collect data, they also provide data. When wearing the data provider hat, enterprises should pay close attention to the types of data that their vendors are collecting and how those vendors are using that data.
So, Sara, when did this become such a big deal?
Well, we suspect that it's been a big deal for a while, but public awareness of it increased exponentially following the 2016 election and a spate of high-profile data breaches. Also, now that everyone is connected with everyone else on a 24/7 basis, and with the explosion of social media, people have realized that almost nothing is private anymore. And in the always connected modern workplace, inadvertent or ill-informed employee sharing of their own information, such as their location, websites visited, and purchases made, has grown substantially. This oversharing should prompt enterprises to limit the data that telecom, tech, and other companies can collect from them or their employees. On top of that, access to social media from company-issued computers and mobile devices could pose additional threats to the sanctity of enterprise data and their reputations.
So what's really at risk?
Joe, Sara and I recently took a look at the terms of use and privacy policies of some leading social media platforms, device manufacturers, and app developers. And that gave us a very interesting perspective on the breadth of the data that they're collecting. For example, Facebook tells you that they collect contact information, your address book, call log, an SMS, i.e. text message, log history, your GPS location at any given time, your photos, your mobile phone number, your IP address, and in some cases, information about other devices that are nearby or on your network. And Facebook isn't alone. Apple and Google also collect an inconceivable amount of detailed user information once a user ID is created or a purchase is made on their platforms.
And Joe, we want to be clear, collection of data in and of itself is not new or problematic. In some cases, it's a good thing. But it seems that companies are sharing more data about their employees, and so indirectly about themselves, than they may have thought when they, or more likely those employees, agree to the same terms and conditions that we all click through to agree to when we activate our devices, software, or apps. The scope of the data sharing economy has exploded in ways that most individuals and even the most vigilant, regulated enterprises couldn't have foreseen.
Is this something that just affects mobile users?
No, Joe, the risk is not limited to mobile devices. Anytime an enterprise customer utilizes a SaaS service or hosted application from a laptop or a desktop workstation, the customer is providing data. So when you're contracting for these sorts of services, it's important to determine what information the service provider is actually collecting and maintaining based on your use versus what information it really needs to provide the service. You should also ask the service provider how it plans to use and share your data and how it stores and secures it.
And because of the feed the beast nature of data monetization, those unavoidable and generally non-negotiable contractual privacy waivers, and the lack of effective legal shields, enterprises have to resort to self-help to protect themselves from oversharing their data. As we talked about on a previous podcast, the U.S. has no single federal law that governs the use and dissemination of personal information. As a result, entities who trade in enterprise data operate in an environment, at least in this country, with very few meaningful sanctions and ineffective, grossly insufficient enforcement.
Okay, the big question, what can an enterprise do to protect itself?
Well, we recommend a combination of internal and externally directed actions. While most large enterprises have internal information security policies, these policies generally don't address the use and sharing of information that was voluntarily provided or unwittingly consented to without the enterprise's awareness or prior vetting. Luckily, enterprises can take a number of internal precautions to limit their disclosure and to withhold or condition their consent to disclosure right out of the box. Joe, if one theme comes through clearly from reviewing telco and tech companies' privacy policies and terms of use, it's this. The primary responsibility for protecting information that a user doesn't want collected lies with the user. With that in mind, we recommend that enterprises invoke all available privacy and security settings that their software, hardware, and apps offer. Second, enterprises should be sure to encrypt all sensitive information in transit from endpoint devices to service providers.
Enterprises that allow employees to access corporate data, email, or apps from a mobile device, including their tablets and laptops, should implement internal safeguards against overbroad data sharing. Installing mobile device management or MDM software on employees' mobile devices allows enterprises to protect company data stored on those devices and to control employees' access to unvetted apps and high-risk sites, even for enterprises with bring-your-own-device environments. MDM software usually incorporates password protection, two-factor authentication, and data encryption, plus the abilities to remotely wipe data and distinguish between apps that are permitted and apps that are prohibited.
Is there anything else that enterprises can do?
There is. Encrypting data stored on and transmitted from mobile devices is an important backstop. Also, a policy that limits access to apps that are available only through the enterprise app store for any device that has access to enterprise systems can prevent employees from using apps that could collect sensitive information. Keep in mind that mobile device management software is unable to override certain native apps such as FaceTime on the Apple operating system, iOS, and on Android devices. So if those native apps are the source of a data leak, an enterprise may have to rely on an employee mobile usage policy to curb risky behavior. Because employees are the last line of defense before an enterprise's information is shared outside the organization, it's critical to sensitize employees to the risks of such openness. Every company should have a written IT policy that details whether mobile device management software is required on mobile devices and which websites and apps may be accessed from devices that also have access to corporate systems, as well as how work-related communications on mobile devices should and should not be made, and which permissions and features on the device should be disabled.
That's a great list of internal precautions. So what about external precautions?
Well, Joe, here's where it gets a bit trickier. While enterprises may not have contractual privity with all entities in the chain of communications between their users, customers, partners, and suppliers, they should insist on data security language in service agreements with the entities with whom they do have privity, including their wireless carriers and SaaS providers. And at a minimum, these agreements should prohibit the service providers from monitoring or accessing the content of communications sent, received, stored, or processed using their services, regardless of any click-through terms or software licenses. And speaking of those click-through terms and software licenses, enterprises should persuade their service providers that the only enforceable terms of use or software license is one that is physically or electronically signed by an authorized representative of the enterprise, not just cavalierly clicked through by some random employee who didn't read it. Unfortunately, this approach does not work with the major wireless OS developers and device manufacturers, including Apple, Google, and Samsung, because almost all enterprises buy their products through a VAR, most commonly a wireless service provider, so there is no direct contractual privity between the enterprise customer and the device manufacturers or OS licensors, and virtually no leverage that an individual enterprise can wield in negotiations with those entities. Finally, if your company has a contract for a customized enterprise-specific app, you should carefully consider the data that the app developer needs to fully realize the purposes of the app and document limitations on the collection of any other data in your agreement. Be sure your negotiated agreement takes precedence over any click-through or online terms.
And Joe, there's some other practical action that we've seen work in the real world. You can consider coordinating with others in your industry or with similar objectives and acting through a trade association or similar organization to advocate for greater transparency around data collection and usage. Group efforts can bring benefits like enhanced leverage, the portrayal of an issue as an industry-wide concern, spreading the cost of advocacy, and making for good public relations. Obviously, there's a tension between every business's need to collect third-party data and its desire to limit the amount of its own data that others collect and use. Greater transparency and control over one's own data are goals that all responsible businesses should support, if for no other reason than achievement of those goals could obviate the need for heavy-handed regulation along the lines of the GDPR. Not only would businesses benefit from those reforms, but their individual employees and customers would as well.
Okay, thanks, Kevin, and thank you as well, Sara. This is clearly an issue that enterprises need to look at closer. If you would like more information about data collection or measures you can take to limit the data your vendors and partners collect, or if you would just like to brainstorm these issues, call or email Kevin or Sara. You can also contact us or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues if you have other ICT needs. Check out our websites or follow us on LinkedIn if you'd like to stay current on the latest industry developments.